Hello, fourth and fifth grade students. It's Mrs. Nathaniel. I'm coming to you with one of my favorite stories that I used to read when I was a classroom teacher. I taught fourth and fifth grade for almost 10 years. And so I have a book that I would always read with my class, and they loved this story. They absolutely loved it. I'm going to be doing a couple of chapters every week. I'm going to read them, and we'll put them on your Google Classroom, and I hope that you really enjoy these stories. This book is called Number the Stars. It is by Lois Lowry, and it is a book full of suspense. If you look at some of the pictures here, it's having to deal with the Jewish people and how they were mistreated during the Holocaust. And so I'm going to read you the blurb on the back so you can get an idea of how this book and how this story, what this story is about. It says 10-year-old Anna Marie Johansson and her best friend Ellen Rosen often think about their life before the war. But it's now 1943, and their life in Copenhagen is filled with school, food shortages, and the Nazi soldiers marching in their town. The Nazis won't stop. The Jews of Denmark are being relocated, so Ellen moves in with the Johanssons and pretends to be a part of the family. Then Anna Marie is asked to go on a dangerous mission. Somehow she must find the strength and courage to save her best friend's life. There's no turning back now. Doesn't that sound exciting? So let's get into it. I'm only going to read chapter 1 today, and then we'll look at some other chapters, and every week or so I'll upload probably about 2 to 3 chapters a week. Chapter 1 is called Why Are You Running? I'll race you to the corner, Ellen. Anne-Marie adjusted the thick leather pack on her back so that her school books balanced evenly. Ready? She looked at her best friend. Ellen made a face. No, she said, laughing. You know I can't beat you. My legs aren't as long. Can't we just walk like civilized people? She was a stocky 10-year-old, unlike lanky Anna Marie. We have to practice for the athletic meet on Friday. I know I'm going to win the girls' race this week. I was second last week, but I've been practicing every day. Come on, Ellen. Anna Marie pleaded, eyeing the distance to the next corner of the Copenhagen street. Please. Ellen hesitated, then nodded and shifted her own rucksack of books against her shoulders. Oh, all right. Ready, she said. Go, shouted Anna Marie. And the 2 girls were off, racing along the residential sidewalk. Anna Marie's silvery blonde hair flew behind her, and Ellen's dark pigtails bounced against her shoulders. Wait for me, wailed Kirsty, left behind, but the 2 other girls weren't listening. Anne Marie outdistanced her friend quickly, even though one of her shoes came untied as she sped along the street outside Osterbrogade, past the small shops and cafes of her neighborhood here in northeast Copenhagen. Laughing, she skirted an elderly lady in black who carried a shopping bag made of string. A young woman pushing a baby in a carriage moved aside to make way. The corner was just ahead. Anne Marie looked up, panting. As she reached the corner, her laughter stopped. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. Halt! The soldier ordered in a stern voice. The German word was as familiar as it was frightening. Anne Marie had heard it often enough before, but it had never been directed at her until now. Behind her, Ellen also slowed and stopped. Far back, little Kirsty was plodding along, her face in a pout because the girls hadn't waited for her. Anna Marie stared up. There were 2 of them. That meant 2 helmets, 2 set of cold eyes glaring at her, and 4 tall, shiny boots planted firmly on the sidewalk, blocking her path to home. And it meant 2 rifles, gripped in the hands of the soldiers. She stared at the rifles first, then, finally, she looked into the face of the soldier who had ordered her to halt. Why are you running? The harsh voice asked. His Danish was very poor. 3 years, Anne Marie thought with contempt. 3 years they've been in our country, and still they can't even speak our language. I was racing with my friend, she answered politely. We have races at school every Friday. I want to do well, so Her voice trailed away and the sentence unfinished. Don't talk too much, she told herself. Just answer them. That's all. She glanced back. Ellen was motionless on the sidewalk a few yards behind her. Farther back, Kirsty was still sulking and walking slowly toward the corner. Nearby, a woman had come to the doorway of the shop and was standing silently, watching. One of the soldiers, the taller one, moved toward her. Anne-Marie recognized him as the one she and Ellen always called in whispers, the giraffe, because of his height and the long neck that extended from his stiff collar. He and his partner were always on this corner. He prodded the corner of her backpack with the stock of his rifle. Anne-Marie trembled. "What's in here?" he asked loudly. From the corner of her eye, she saw the shopkeeper move quietly back into the shadows of the doorway, out of sight. School books," she answered truthfully. "Are you a good student?" the soldier asked. He seemed to be sneering. "Yes." "What's your name?" "Anne-Marie Johansson." "Your friend? Is she a good student too?" He was looking beyond her at Ellen, who hadn't moved. Anne-Marie looked back too and saw that Ellen's face, usually rosy-cheeked, was pale, and her dark eyes were wide. She nodded at the soldier. Better than me," she said. "What is her name?" "Ellen." "And who is this?" he asked, looking at Anne-Marie's side. Kirsty had appeared there suddenly, scowling at everyone. "My little sister." She reached down for Kirsty's hand, but Kirsty, always stubborn, refused it and put her hands on her hips defiantly. The soldier reached down and stroked her little sister's short, tangled curls. "Stand still, Kirsty," Anne-Marie ordered silently, praying that somehow the obstinate 5-year-old would receive the message. But Kirsty reached up and pushed the soldier's hand away. "Don't," she said loudly. Both soldiers began to laugh. They spoke to each other in rapid German that Anne-Marie couldn't understand. "She is pretty, like my own little girl," the tall one said in a more pleasant voice. Anne-Marie tried to smile politely. "Go home, all of you. Go study your school books. And don't run. You look like hoodlums when you run." The two soldiers turned away. Quickly, Anne-Marie reached down and grabbed her sister's hand before Kirsty could resist. Hurrying the little girl along, she rounded the corner. In a moment, Ellen was beside her. They walked quickly, not speaking, with Kirsty between them, toward the large apartment building where both families lived. When they were almost home, Ellen whispered suddenly, "I was so scared." "Me too," Anne-Marie whispered back. As they turned to enter the building, both girls looked straight ahead toward the door. They did it purposely so that they would not catch the eyes or the attention of 2 more soldiers who stood with their guns on this corner as well. Kirsty scurried ahead of them through the door, chattering about the pictures she was bringing home from kindergarten to show Mama. For Kirsty, the soldiers were simply part of the landscape, something that had always been there on every corner, as unimportant as lampposts throughout her remembered life. "Are you going to tell your mother?" Ellen asked Anne-Marie as they trudged together up the stairs. "I'm not. My mother would be upset." "No, I won't either. Mama would probably scold me for running on the street." She said goodbye to Ellen on the 2nd floor where Ellen lived and continued on to the 3rd, practicing in her mind a cheerful greeting for her mother, a smile, a description of today's spelling test in which she had done well. But she was too late. Kirsty had gotten there first. "And he poked Anne-Marie's book bag with his gun, and then he grabbed my hair." Kirsty was chattering as she took off her sweater in the center of the apartment living room. "But I wasn't scared. Anne-Marie was, and Ellen too, but not me." Mrs. Johansson rose quickly from the chair by the window where she'd been sitting. Mrs. Rosen, Ellen's mother, was there too, in the opposite chair. They'd been having coffee together, as they did many afternoons. Of course, it wasn't really coffee, though the mothers still called it that, having coffee. There had been no real coffee in Copenhagen since the beginning of the Nazi occupation, not even any real tea. The mothers sipped at hot water flavored with herbs. "Anne-Marie, what happened? What is Kirsty talking about?" the mother asked anxiously. "Where's Ellen?" Miss Rosen had a frightened look. "Ellen's in your apartment. She didn't realize you were here," Anne-Marie explained. "Don't worry, it wasn't anything. It was the 2 soldiers who stand on the corner of Oster Brigade. You've seen them. You know, the tall one with the long neck, the one who looks like a silly giraffe." She told her mother and Mrs. Rosen of the incident, trying to make it sound humorous and unimportant. But their uneasy looks didn't change. "I slapped his hand and shouted him," Kirsty announced importantly. No, she didn't, Mama. Anne-Marie reassured her mother. She's exaggerating, as she always does. Mrs. Johansson moved to the window and looked down the street below. The Copenhagen neighborhood was quiet. It looked the same as always, people coming and going from the shops, children at play, the soldiers on the corner. She spoke in a low voice to Ellen's mother. They must be edgy because of the latest resistance incidents. Did you read in the Freidansk about the bombings in Hillerød and Nørrebro? Although she pretended to be absorbed in unpacking her school books, Anne-Marie listened, and she knew what her mother was referring to. The Free Danes, was an illegal newspaper. Peter Nielsen brought it to them occasionally, carefully folded and hidden among the ordinary books and papers. Mama always burned it after she and Papa read it, but Anne-Marie heard Mama and Papa talk, sometimes at night, about the news they received that way. News of sabotage against the Nazis, bombs hidden and exploded in the factories that produce war materials, and industrial railroad lines damaged so that the goods couldn't be transported. And she knew that what resistance meant. Papa had explained when she overheard the word and asked. The resistance fighters were Danish people. No one knew who, because they were very secret, who were determined to bring harm to the Nazis however they could. They damaged the German trucks and cars and bombed their factories. They were very brave. Sometimes they were caught and killed. I must go and speak to Ellen, Miss Rosen said, moving toward the door. You girls walk a different way to school tomorrow. Promise me, Anne-Marie. And Ellen will promise too. We will, Mrs. Rosen. But what does it matter? There are German soldiers on every corner. But they will remember your faces, Mrs. Rosen said, turning in the doorway to the hall. It is important to be one of the crowd, always. Be one of many. Be sure that they never have a reason to remember your face. She disappeared into the hall and closed the door behind her. He'll remember my face, Mama, Kirsty announced happily, because he said I look like his little girl. He said I was pretty. If he has such a pretty little girl, why doesn't he go back to her like a good father? Mrs. Johansson murmured, stroking Kirsty's cheek. Why doesn't he go back to his own country? Mama, is there anything to eat? Anne-Marie asked, hoping to take her mother's mind away from the soldiers. Take some bread and give a piece to your sister. With butter? Kirsty asked hopefully. No butter. Her mother replied, you know that. Kirsty sighed as Anne-Marie went to the bread box in the kitchen. I wish I could have a cupcake, she said, a big yellow cupcake with pink frosting. Her mother laughed. For a little girl, you have a long memory, she said. She told Kirsty. There hasn't been any butter or sugar for cupcakes for a long time, a year at least. When will there be cupcakes again? When the war ends, Mrs. Johansson said. She glanced through the window, down to the street corner where the soldiers stood, their faces impassive beneath the metal helmets. When the soldiers leave. That's the end of chapter 1. Next chapter is going to be Who is the Man Who Rides Past? So we'll look at that chapter next. I hope you enjoyed chapter 1 of Number the Stars. If you would like to, you can also find this book. You can read along. They do allow checkout through the San Antonio Public Library virtually. So if you want to read along with me, you're welcome to do that. And then do one of your reading squares on your bingo reading activity. Have a good day.